All right. Hey, welcome everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Good to be back. Last week had something going on as I announced, and so I couldn't be here. But it looks like Todd and Angel covered for me very well, so I appreciate that. So I am looking forward to today's discussion. We covered quite a bit today, and I wanted to just add that I have a few things that I wanted to kind of pick up and talk about in the time where I'm waiting on other people to express their thoughts and comments and so forth. So if you don't have things to talk about, I can ramble on and on, but I really want to hear from you. We spent a lot of time together this morning. That was a very long session. I know it always takes Seth longer to do those kind of things whenever we go well beyond what we intend to do. So appreciate his work. But I've got a few things that I jotted down in the form of notes. So, by the way, again, welcome everyone. I see our Zoom call has quite a few people. And then on YouTube, it looks like we have about 27 people on YouTube. Some of those may be the same people. I know some of you might want to monitor both. So, I'm going to try to keep up with the questions that are pushed through on YouTube in case you have some questions. You'll be with us for about 30, 45 minutes, and then the Zoom call is going to continue on. Here are a couple of things that I wrote down as I watched it with you. The idea of the monarchy as an accommodation. I know several people brought that up. In other words, is this something that is divinely ordained? Is it something from God through Moses that made it into the legal code? Or is it something which is added later? And if it's added later, can it still be traced back to a divine author? In other words, maybe God said, well, it wasn't in the original plan, but if you want a king and you insist on having a king, I'll give you a king, and you'll see that it wasn't a good idea, and so forth. The other thing that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about, if you don't have other things to talk about, that's 2 copies of the scroll. Let's talk about that. In Deuteronomy 17:18, we get this idea of either a copy of the scroll of this Torah as it's put, or a duplicate law, if you will. So we'll talk about that. I wrote down, because there was a lot of activity around the idea when we were talking about the sons of Aaron versus the Levitical priest. What's the difference? Why does Deuteronomy refer to it that way, whereas the other priestly writers in the Pentateuch refer to the sons of Aaron? So we'll talk about that. And then it seemed that a lot of people were really interested in this idea of the names. What are those Egyptian names that make it into the story? We've got 13 names in the Pentateuch, which most scholars believe can be traced back to Egyptian origin. Is that significant? Is it not significant? Your video mic didn't go on. All right. Hey, that was an interesting thing. We had a glitch there. So now I'm live on Zoom and YouTube. So if you were watching YouTube and Zoom, you get this twice, but I can do it better. So here we go. Sometimes when these things happen, it's ordained from heaven. Speaking of ordained from heaven, we've got some questions generated from the class today. Is the monarchy of divine origin, or is it something which was added later? If it's added later, is it something that God allows, sort of an accommodation? In other words, is it going to be something where the God says, okay, you asked for it, you got it. Here's the monarchy. I'm going to have my prophet tell you that it's not a good idea. You're going to insist on doing it anyway. It's going to be one of those I told you so's. We'll talk about the 2 copies of the scroll. I think that drew a lot of attention and chatter during the video. And then the sons of Aaron versus the Levitical priest. Is there a difference? And why does Deuteronomy seemingly not even know about the sons of Aaron? We'll talk about that a little bit. There was a lot of people who were interested in this idea of the Levitical names. When we challenge the idea, and this is controversial, this even makes me nervous, right? And I don't get nervous that often, but it is one of those things that gave me pause when I realized that there are some academics with pretty good reason questioning the origin story of the Levitical clan. When did that come in? And is there an association with this idea that the Levites are joiners to the tribes of Israel and not necessarily originally part of that group? And then what does that have to do with the 13 names in the Pentateuch, which are Egyptian in origin? Then the other thing that I have is, why do we read the word prophet before the word prophet was supposedly known? So those are some big ones, right? If we hit those topics today, I think we'll have done something pretty good. The monarchy, the two scrolls that are to be written, that's part of the monarchy thing. Sons of Aaron versus Levitical priests. Levitical names are actually Egyptian and only Levitical names, and the prophet. What are some of your questions? I'm gonna take a sip of coffee, and I'm gonna see if anyone wants to jump in right away. If not, I'm gonna start tackling some of these topics, and I'll also I have a couple of other things I wanted to talk about too. So let me just make sure. 1 second. A Zoom link. Uh, Okay, someone was asking for a Zoom link. Give us 1 minute and we'll get that to you. Okay, let's see. We've got Clody with her hand up. Good morning, Clody.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing wonderful.
So I have a question for you, Ross.
Okay.
I understand the academics and the scholarly views.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What do you think? When was the last hand that edited the Bible?
I think the last hand, that's a good question. I think it's in phases, first of all. So it goes through quite a bit of rewrite. I think we see some of this, and we know we see some of this. We have evidence at the end of some of the later books that some of this is in the Persian period, so 500s BCE. As far as that's just clearly indicated in the text, right? We have evidence of that. Now, I think that what we can know for sure is that by sometime in that period between, and I'm going to be a little bit broad, Clody, if I may, I'll
Yes.
say from 350 to 500 BC. This is the absolute final phases of getting the Bible into the place that we have it now, right? So you see clearly that that's the case, because by the time you get to the 3rd century BC, actually the 4th century BCE, we already have copies of the whole thing. Like the Septuagint comes together in phases as well, but that's generally the time frame. But I think most of the history as we have it, apart from that last section, I think Jeremiah, this is just speculation, but it's based on a lot of study. I do think that we have evidence that Jeremiah and Baruch, or someone in the 7th century BC, is sort of this final redaction of the Pentateuch and what is called the Deuteronomic history. So you go from Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. I think all of that is really sort of sealed up by the 7th century BCE.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that is a little bit shocking to some people, and maybe makes people nervous who are more fundamentalist in their approach, is to find out, whether they accept it or not, but to find out that some of the things that are in the Pentateuch simply weren't, they clearly have to be from the 7th century.
Mhm.
You know, and even as we'll get into this, even like the term prophet, I mean, that comes in way later. And but what I try to do is look at the internal evidence within the Bible, and it kind of gives us certain clues. Now I'm ready for follow-ups. Do you have more? Because I
I
know.
believe
Yep.
I have some doubts about that. Why?
Yep.
Because as we follow with as you guide us through Jesus studies, through the studies for Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
I believe that we will see that he does not cite the Tanakh as we have it.
Okay.
And I believe that that's a big I mean, it's, I think, a strong point for perhaps understanding that we don't have the Tanakh as it is now during Jesus's time.
Now, give me an example if you can. I know that I kind of gave you a general thing, and
Yeah.
you didn't push me on it, but I'm just curious because I'm interested in this idea.
Now, what I see, and we have I have to be to get refreshed in New Testament, of course.
Uh-huh.
But I do remember that in the four Gospels, Jesus cites some of the prophets,
Yep.
and he cites the 10 words for sure, but I don't see him citing the whole Tanakh like uh, as we read in Prophet, this one, we have this, like we do it today.
Yeah.
He only cites the sayings.
He says what now? He quotes what?
Quotes the sayings.
Okay.
Yeah, just some phrases. He
Okay.
doesn't say that we find this at this place or whatever,
Yeah.
which I absolutely love, because I quoting is a very academic thing, and it's not a philosophical or human way to teach people.
Yeah.
But I mean, it looks to me a little bit, even from the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't see exactly the same
Yeah.
scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, of course, you know best, and that's why I asked you. But I have a big question and doubt that the whole thing is a very later rendering, and not only rendering, but also editing some places.
Yeah. All
As
right.
for
Yep.
Mhm.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead. Keep going.
no,
Keep going.
that's another thing. So you
Okay.
let's
All right.
go.
So good. Let me jump in on that because you're bringing
Mhm.
up some really good points, and so let me take it a little bit further now. So what we have, if people pick up the Tanakh, and you know, years ago when I put the New Testament on the shelf and I said, "Oh, we have textual problems. That can't be the Word of God," and then I said, "Let me jump into the Hebrew Bible," and I carried with me the Koran Tanakh because this was the Jewish version, and I just felt like it had the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and it had been accurately preserved. And the Greek Septuagint, I didn't care about. The Samaritan Pentateuch, I didn't care about all these offshoot ideas. What I wanted to know was give me the one that was preserved faithfully by the Jewish people. hallelujah, thank God this is going to be my Bible. And so when I picked that up and I studied it for years with that understanding or with that lean, I felt like, okay, I'm going to push. This is the real Bible, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Well, one of the things that, as I began to study the Dead Sea Scrolls, this was the first aha moment. I started studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you find out quickly that these texts range in time, let's say roughly, bear with me, say 200 BCE, 200
Mm-hmm.
BC to about 100 AD or CE. So, just that period of
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
Now, within that group of texts, we have a lot of biblical texts. We have about, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, of all the texts that were discovered at Qumran, they represent about 1,000 manuscripts in
Mm-hmm.
whole or in part, mostly in, fragments. But of that 1,000, 25%, around 240 of those are biblical texts.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take that biblical grouping, the 240, and what scholars really started doing in 1946, 47, when they were first discovered, through the 50s, 60s, and even today, is they say, well, let me look at these and compare them to that Bible that Ross was carrying that he says is the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. And what we realized is that some of those texts were very, very similar to the text that we find in the Masoretic Bible. That the Masoretic, meaning the scribes, the Masoretes, the ones they preserved. But then other texts were very different. I mean, like way different. Some of these texts looked closer to the Greek Septuagint, even though they're written in Hebrew. They look more like the Greek Septuagint than they do the Hebrew Masoretic text. Okay, so I'm throwing a bunch out there. So then you say, well, the Dead Sea Scrolls don't give us a lot of confidence that the Masoretic Bible was the only Bible. You could still say, I believe that it's the authorized, approved, it's the most accurate. You could get all those arguments. But what we
Mm-hmm.
find is that in that period, say 250 BC to 100 AD, there's more fluidity in the text. It's not so precise. You see different readings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where I had before dismissed the Septuagint, let me take that just for a moment. And please jump in, Clody, if you have other questions. But
Listening. Yeah.
so one of the things that I started believing, I would listen and watch these anti-missionary guys, some of the rabbis or whoever who are, ridiculing the Christianity part of things. And they would say, look, the New Testament misquotes the Hebrew Bible. Well, what they're doing is they're comparing the New Testament Greek manuscript against the Hebrew Masoretic text.
Mm-hmm.
And to that comparison, they're often right.
Yeah.
But that assumes that the Hebrew Bible they have can be traced back to Moses and Joshua and Samuel and David and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But what we started learning, particularly from the Dead Sea Scrolls in critical scholarship, is we have to first determine which text precedes the other. So there was a big debate before the scrolls were discovered, and they said, we believe that the Septuagint reflects a copy of what is the more reliable Hebrew text. That by that they meant the Masoretic text. But what we now find is that sometimes
The Septuagint is older.
that's right. It
Mm-hmm.
looks like people don't argue that it was translated from Hebrew, but it wasn't translated from, say, the Masoretic text.
Yeah.
So when I started learning all these things, I thought, maybe maybe to be fair, I have to really begin a more in-depth study of critical biblical studies and trying to ask those tougher questions, like when did the Bible reach the form that we have it, like you said. So Jesus, I think, and the gospel writers, whether it can be traced to Jesus historically or not, people could argue that too. People argue everything.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but do the writers of the New Testament know a, let's call it an Old Testament verse or chapter that we don't have in the current Bible, or a reading or something like that? And the answer to that is yes, they do.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And here's the other thing. A lot of people kind of migrate from Christianity to a quasi-Judaism, more oriented towards Judaism, the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, Tanakh. And what I find interesting now, stepping back a little bit and taking a deep breath and trying to be honest to Moses and Jesus, I look at things like when I first learned that Jesus read, and Paul, believe it or not, read from the Torah and the prophets, I wanted to know, well, how do you do that? And then I said, oh, the Jews still do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you start looking at Judaism and how they follow the annual cycle of readings. I later find out that the triennial cycle is older, and that would probably be the one that was followed by in Jesus's day, and certainly by the time of Paul and the later formulation of the New Testament. But do you know what some of the things that are exciting for me now and very informative are things like this? The earliest reference to reading from the Torah and the prophets in a synagogue don't come from Jewish sources unless you admit that the New
Mm-hmm.
Testament is a Jewish source.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Now, I know I rambled a lot, so I'm ready for some follow-up.
No, what I wanted to, I have a question to raise.
Okay.
If we say that the Josianic era is one of the strongest editing parts or points of the Tanakh as we have it now, because we understand the monarchic propaganda.
Yep.
Because it is a propaganda.
Amen.
It's like, and I wanted to make the parallel with, we have a national hero, us Albanians, as most of the nations, and his name is Skanderbeg, and he lived in the 1600s, and now we are stating that he was superhuman, almost.
Okay.
And it's only 400 years earlier. So it's like the giants myth.
Yeah.
Somewhat, because we tend to exaggerate whatever we have traditionally inherited, like narration.
Yeah.
And I believe that King David is also one of the heroes, the national heroes of Israel. And I believe that he is such a superhuman that they made a Messiah out of King David, and they wait King David come again, or the Messiah like David, or I don't know. Mm-hmm. So he's a little bit like a superhuman, a superhero. And I see that trying to maintain this kind of power or rule or law throughout Israel's nation back then, they try to justify along the what is logic and what not, why he did not build the temple, for example, because David Tyler raised a really good question. He said, what is the 2 Samuel 7 mean? I believe that that's what it means. They are justifying why King David did not make it to the point where he could build the temple.
Yeah.
As we see, I believe that the 40 years in the desert is a justifying of Israel's God on why it took that long to go inside the land.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why am I zooming out? I'm zooming out because I believe that the Masoretic Wikipedia states that it was rendered along between the 7th and the 10th century, our
Right.
era.
Right.
So I am like, okay, we understood the Josianic era propaganda, and we are understanding what is happening during the Ebionites and the Jesus or Yeshua era, EJ would say.
Mm-hmm.
So we understand what their filter is. The filter of Josianic era is, let's make a propaganda for the kingdom, for the monarchic times.
Yeah.
It was an excellent class, thank you. And I can see that during the first centuries, before and after Jesus, I believe that is like a national awareness. So they are trying to make people not melt with Romans. They are trying to raise a national consciousness. At least that's what I see. Now, what is happening during the 7th to the 10th centuries Common Era? Because we have a very good organized work in composing Tanakh.
Yep.
And we have to understand what their aim was, what their main scope was, so that we can understand their filter or colors within the text. And I believe that happens even in our modern era with, not I believe, it's a common sense and it's a common knowledge that even the translations put their filters. So if we understand what their scope was and their aim and their propaganda, we will understand where the seeds are, the bad seeds or the strange foreign seeds are.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Well,
my
let me jump on that. No, it's you're looking at the problem, and what you're saying is, how do we identify when this garden, someone planted a garden and then someone later threw seeds of tares and thorns, and when did that happen? And what's driving that? That's the question of biblical scholarship, and it's one of the things that we're working on. When I give the date, like when I say, okay, it looks like there is a major revisionist like first wave that I would say happens in the time. We don't get anything from the text that says even in Hezekiah's time that there was a book that was discovered. So we don't, even though some scholars suggest that that's wave one, I don't know that it is. I think that's part of the story that might come in later. I think Josiah's time is really wave one, right? That's when there's a real attempt to bring together the books. And it makes sense to me because they feel threatened that they're going to go into exile. And so there is an attempt to bring all of this literature together and compile the history to save it, if you will. So I could see Jeremiah and Baruch, at least from what we know of them from the narratives, as feeling some ownership there. Jeremiah says that his calling, he's got to tear down, he's got to rebuild. And so we do see some evidence of that. And then we see physical evidence, literary evidence in the text that there is some additional work done during the Persian period. For instance, Cyrus is mentioned specifically, and we see Cyrus entering into even
Yes.
the latter parts of Isaiah, what we call Deutero-Isaiah. In fact, Isaiah 45, according to that text, God supposedly calls a Persian his Messiah. So there again, there's evidence that that's going on. Now, one of the things that I'm looking at now with a little more interest is an idea that the Maccabean period is very important in this. And so we'll say the Hashmoneans, the Hashmonean dynasty, say 140 BCE to 63 BCE. So it's still, it's still before the time of Jesus. But what we see is a great nationalistic resurgence where the Jews are very, very powerful at that time. In fact, they're even conquering like Edomite territories and forcing people to convert to Judaism. That's how we get the story of Herod. He's an Idumean. He's an Edomite. And the Hashmoneans they've got a sword in one hand and a Bible they're cleaning up in the other, and they're saying, this is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And oh, by the way, you better believe me because I'm big and powerful and I have this sword with two edges on it. And so we see some of that. So I find that to be interesting as well. So to your point, we have to say, is there evidence in the text which clearly indicates one period over the other? And the answer to that is yes, we do have. We have one level, just read the Bible as we have it. Now, as far as the as far as the Masoretes go, and between, like you said, the 7th to 10th century, up in Sepphoris in the Galilee, it's a very prosperous time. And these rabbis have the ability and the means, and they begin to pull together the definitive text. So when a fundamentalist, let's say someone who is trained in biblical Hebrew and they're really interested in going out and finding all these scrolls, like Nehemiah Gordon, for instance, he's going around the world and he's finding scrolls with the divine name, with the vowel points and all that. He's looking for Masoretic text. These texts are like, you can find 100 of them, 200, 1,000, 1,000,000 of them. What those texts are is very late in the process of forming the Bible. Now, what we do know is that from the time, say, of Ben Asher, which is one of the Masoretic scribes, the most famous, we have some of the oldest versions of the Bible attributed to these Masoretic schools. By the time we get there, there's a good bit of consistency. So one Bible, and you know what they'll often say when they write, like the Leningrad Codex, at the beginning, which is the Leningrad Codex, dates to 1009 AD. This is the oldest complete Bible we have of the Hebrew Bible. So I guess my point is that by the time you get there, they are saying with confidence, this is the Bible, and we copied it from this tradition, and you can match, and they're pretty consistent. They're not totally, like, it's not letter for letter, jot for tittle. Jesus appears to be, when he's quoting, most scholars say, well, he's quoting the Septuagint. Paul is quoting the Septuagint. These New Testament writers often, when they quote the Old Testament, they're quoting from the Septuagint. But I don't necessarily believe that. They could be quoting what we call a pholaga, a Hebrew text that we just don't have. And maybe the Greek writer is quoting a Greek translation of an earlier Hebrew manuscript that we just don't have anymore. And the Dead Sea Scrolls are going to help us figure out stuff like that, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Now,
yep, go ahead.
I had another parallel.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, the Council of Nicaea was happened around the fourth century of our
325.
era.
325, yep. Mm-hmm.
I remembered 323. It's okay.
Yeah.
So it's along that time. So I would really want to know, how did the Council of Nicaea, so from the fourth century until the moment when we have the whole Bible from Christianity with the Old Testament. Did you understand my question?
No, from Nicaea. What? Say it one more time. Sorry.
The Council of Nicaea put the decrees that the Christianity can accept, right?
Well,
And
go
which
ahead.
of the Gospels? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not my field. It's not
Yeah.
the council, so I don't want to steer you wrong there. But what I do know is that a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on what came out of the Council of Nicaea. So I'm going to say I don't know to your question,
Okay.
but what I will say is that there are a lot of videos out there, and a lot of people are writing Facebook posts that say, in the Council of Nicaea, people believed that's where the Trinity came in, that's where this came in, that's where that came in. I think we put a lot more on the Council of Nicaea than maybe can be historically traced. But to answer that, I would probably begin maybe with the wiki on the Council of Nicaea, because there are good records that say here are the things that came out of that. So I don't know. But at some point, we get into the question of canonicity and when did certain books become accepted as authoritative. So let me say, in Josephus, we get a reference to in other words, Josephus says, I can get the quote, I don't have it off the top of my head. Josephus says that there are a lot of people who have a lot of holy books, but we, meaning the Jewish people, only have 22. And
go figure.
So the first thing you do is you go, 22? Well, wait a minute. The Old Testament in a Christian Bible has 39. So are we missing some? Well, let's look at it. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament according to the Jewish people, the Tanakh, has 24 books. Well, that's a lot closer to 22.
Yes.
And so then you say, well, if I compare the Jewish Tanakh to the Christian Old Testament, they have the same material, they just divide the books differently. And through a careful study of the Talmud in Baba Batra 14 and 15, this is just evidence that I'm a nerd that I would know that, you can look at the books, and it, again, from 22 to 24, it's simply a restructuring of the same material. Okay. So, and the writers, the church fathers, Jerome and others, will say the Jewish people have 22 books of the Hebrew Bible. The book of Jubilees, copies of which were found at Qumran, says that there are 22 books of the Hebrew Bible. And he goes on, the writer of Jubilees tells us there's 22 of this and that and this and that and 22 acts of creation, and he goes on and on.
Yeah. So we find symbols then.
That's right. So one thing that I would say is that if we trace it back, at least for the Hebrew Bible, we can figure out with pretty good certainty that by the time of Josephus, first century of the Common Era, they had the same books that they would consider authoritative. Now, when Jesus goes into the synagogue at Nazareth, let's say, they didn't have a Tanakh on the table. They would have had scrolls and I don't know how many scrolls they would have had. I don't know. People argue on the literacy in the first century, but that's a bunch of scholarly guesses. You know, you have to go by. In fact, those numbers changed as soon as we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were like, "Uh-oh, I guess people could read back then." But
Mhm.
but what we have to figure is, like, I don't know if a synagogue, say in a small town, would have a scroll of every prophet and all of the historical books, and they would probably at least have the Pentateuch, as
Mhm.
we have it almost. Now,
Mhm.
they didn't have chapter and verse, so I actually think this is pretty cool, and it's evidence that Jesus knows these things. There's a place where he goes, "Have you not read in the story of the bush?" What's he talking about? Exodus 3, the story of the
Yes.
bush.
Mhm.
Moses sees the bush and it's not burnt. I like the way the ancient writers, because they didn't have a way to say it, you know, in the book of Acts, we get we get several things where they're alluding to a certain psalm. Does it not say somewhere in the Psalms that David's, you know, he died and you know, so they know these things. They just don't have a way. You have to go the story. You know, what are the story that we're talking about?
Yep, yep. That's a cool way to refer to things because the verses get a little bit overwhelming at times. Uh, I just wanted to end all this.
Okay.
I believe that Christianity, at one point of our era, of course, apparently, uh, did have some kind of cool cooperation with Judaism to come to the text, to the authoritative text. Even if it wasn't the already existing authoritative text from Judaism, really gave a lot of insight to Christianity and to what Christianity considers authoritative and accepted canon Bible. And I wanted to finish all this because your the whole episode today stirred me up, and I believe that the whole thing of having an authoritative book is to rule, and to have something to quote as the whole truth. And I believe that that's not only for the bad, because sometimes we say, oh, they wanted to exercise power, and they wanted their ruling class not to lose their power.
Yeah.
But I believe that humanity was at a point of consciousness. It's weird that I'm referring to this second day in the row because I referred to this also yesterday. Uh, I believe that the consciousness of humanity throughout the ages was not the one that is now mostly, because of course there are weird people doing weird stuff,
Yeah.
and we have weird wars. But I believe that during that era you had to have an authoritative book or a set of laws that people could refer to and set the difference between right and wrong. Otherwise, everything would be chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be difficult to argument and debate one's point of view of what is right versus what is wrong.
It's, you know, it's a whole lot easier as a parent. And just in a minute, in fact, let me tell our YouTube audience, Shalom, if
It
you're
was
in if you're in the YouTube audience and you're part of the Yachad, come on over to the Zoom call, And Seth posted a note. If you need that link, then just email us, and he can get that to you. But we're going to go into the Zoom call. Shabbat Shalom, everyone on YouTube. We will see you this week coming up with all sorts of fun stuff. Stick around. Have a beautiful, hopefully a lot of you have a long weekend. So at least if you're in America. So enjoy, and God bless you. Thanks for joining.